Sarah Collins trudged up the dusty path, the two heavy buckets swinging from the yoke across her shoulders. Water sloshed over the edges, dampening her worn sneakers as the early morning sun cast long shadows across the parched hillside. 10 trips a day, every day since the well in their small rural community had dried up 3 months ago. Her arms ached, but the thought of her 6-month-old daughter Emma sleeping peacefully in Mrs. Rodriguez's care kept her moving forward. This was their reality. No running water in their dilapidated rental cottage, and the nearest public water source was a half-mile downhill. Almost there, Sarah whispered to herself, adjusting the wooden yoke with calloused hands. At 26, her face already showed the lines of someone who had weathered too many storms. Once a promising nursing student, her life had veered dramatically off course when Emma's father abandoned them upon learning of the pregnancy. Now her daily routine revolved around these buckets, her part-time job at the local diner, and the precious moments with her daughter. The cottage came into view, a small, weather-beaten structure at the edge of Oak Ridge, a once thriving town now struggling after the closure of the lumber mill that had been its economic backbone. Sarah set down the buckets by the door, allowing herself a moment to stretch her aching back before carrying them inside, careful not to wake Emma. "You're back early today," Mrs. Rodriguez said softly, rising from the rocking chair where she had been knitting. The elderly woman lived next door and had become Sarah's saving grace, watching Emma during her water runs and early diner shifts, in exchange for help with groceries and house repairs. "Wanted to get ahead before the heat sets in," Sarah replied, gently transferring the precious water to the large storage containers that dominated one corner of the tiny kitchen. "How was she?" "An angel, as always." Mrs. Rodriguez smiled, gathering her things. "Don't forget about the town meeting tonight. They're discussing the water situation." Sarah nodded, though they both knew she wouldn't attend. After working a double shift at the diner, she would barely have energy to complete her evening water run, let alone sit through hours of circular discussions that had thus far yielded no solutions. As Mrs. Rodriguez left, Sarah moved to the crib where Emma slept. The sight of her daughter's peaceful face melted away some of her exhaustion. "I promise it won't always be like this," she whispered, brushing a finger against Emma's soft cheek. 2 hours later, Sarah had completed 3 more water runs and was preparing for her shift at Maggie's diner. She secured Emma in the baby carrier that had become her constant companion and headed down the main street of Oak Ridge. The diner was unusually busy when she arrived, with a sleek black SUV parked outside that stood out among the town's weathered vehicles. "About time," Maggie said, though her tone was kind. The middle-aged diner owner had taken a chance on Sarah when no one else would hire a single mother with a newborn. "Got a VIP in booth 7, some big city CEO looking to buy the old mill property." Sarah nodded, quickly tying her apron while Mrs. Rodriguez, who often helped at the diner too, took Emma. She grabbed her notepad and headed to booth 7, where a man sat studying documents spread across the table. "Welcome to Maggie's. Can I get you started with something to drink?" she asked, not looking up from her notepad. "Coffee? Black, please," came the reply in a deep, measured voice. When Sarah glanced up, she found herself looking into the most intensely blue eyes she'd ever seen. The man was in his mid-30s, with dark hair and the kind of tailored suit that probably cost more than her annual rent. He was studying her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "Right away," she said, turning quickly to hide her inexplicable blush. As she prepared his coffee, she could feel his gaze following her. When Emma started fussing in Mrs. Rodriguez's arms across the diner, Sarah instinctively glanced over. "Your daughter?" the man asked when she returned with his coffee. "Yes," Sarah replied simply, poised to take his order. "I'm Alexander Reeves," he said, surprising her by offering his hand. "I hear you're quite the talk of the town, carrying water buckets up and down the hill every day." Sarah's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "You hear a lot in a short time." "Small towns," he said with a slight smile. "I've learned more in 2 hours here than I would in a month of meetings in Boston." Before she could respond, Maggie called for her to take another order. The morning rush kept her busy, but she was acutely aware of Alexander Reeves watching her whenever she passed his booth. He stayed for nearly 2 hours, making one coffee last while he wrote in a leather-bound notebook. As her shift progressed, Sarah learned bits about the mysterious visitor from conversations around her. Alexander Reeves was the CEO of Reeves Development, a company known for transforming struggling rural communities. Some locals were excited about potential jobs, others worried about outsiders changing their town's character. When Sarah approached to refill his coffee for the third time, Reeves finally closed his notebook. "May I ask you something, Sarah?" He had clearly picked up her name from other customers calling to her. "Sure," she replied cautiously. "Why carry water? Doesn't the town deliver to those outside the main water lines?" The question caught her off guard. "They used to, but the service was cut due to budget constraints. It's either carry it or pay for delivery I can't afford." He nodded thoughtfully. "And how many trips do you make daily?" 10, sometimes 12 in summer. She wasn't sure why she was sharing this with a stranger, especially one who made her strangely self-conscious. "Thank you for your honesty," he said, leaving a generous tip as he gathered his papers. "I hope to see you at the town meeting tonight." Sarah gave a non-committal nod as he left, trying to ignore the inexplicable disappointment she felt watching him go. That afternoon, after completing 2 more water runs and picking up Emma from Mrs. Rodriguez, Sarah was surprised to find an official town notice taped to her door. The location of the evening's town meeting had been changed to the old mill site itself, and attendance was strongly encouraged for all residents affected by the water situation. Curiosity overcame her exhaustion. As dusk fell, Sarah bundled Emma up and walked to the mill, joining a growing crowd of townsfolk gathered in the yard, where Alexander Reeves stood on a makeshift platform. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his authoritative voice silencing the murmurs. "Today I witnessed something that changed my perspective on this project. I saw a young mother making multiple trips to carry water uphill while caring for an infant and working a job." Sarah felt eyes turning toward her, and she instinctively held Emma closer. "My company originally came here to convert this mill into luxury retreats," Reeves continued, "but I'm proposing a different approach. Reeves Development will restore this mill as a sustainable manufacturing facility, with priority hiring for local residents. More importantly, we'll fund immediate infrastructure repairs, starting with the town's water system." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sarah stood frozen, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Sometimes we need to be reminded of what truly matters," Reeves said, his gaze finding Sarah in the crowd. "And today, I was powerfully reminded." As the meeting concluded with enthusiastic approval from the townspeople, Reeves made his way directly to Sarah. "I hope I didn't embarrass you," he said quietly, "but your determination sparked something. This town doesn't need luxury retreats. It needs its strength back." "Why would you change your entire business plan because of one person?" Sarah asked, genuinely perplexed. Alexander's expression softened. "Sometimes we need to see something with our own eyes to understand its value." He hesitated, then added, "I'd like to hear more about your perspective on what this town needs, perhaps over dinner tomorrow?" Sarah looked at him skeptically. "I can't leave Emma." "Bring her," he said without hesitation. "I'd be honored to meet her properly." As they stood there in the fading light, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time, a flicker of hope that perhaps the weight she carried wasn't hers to bear alone forever. Sarah spent the following day in a state of disbelief, replaying Alexander Reeves's invitation in her mind while completing her usual water runs. She had agreed to meet him, though a voice inside questioned his motives. Men like him didn't typically take interest in struggling single mothers from forgotten towns. "You're actually going?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked that afternoon, eyebrows raised as she helped Sarah select the least worn of her meager wardrobe options, a simple blue dress she hadn't worn since before Emma was born. "It's not what you think," Sarah insisted, though her flushed cheeks suggested otherwise. "He wants to discuss the town's needs before finalizing his plans." Mrs. Rodriguez gave her a knowing smile. "Of course. That's why he's sending a car instead of meeting at Maggie's." Sarah couldn't argue with that logic. The black town car pulling up outside her cottage at precisely 6 o'clock seemed wildly out of place on the rutted dirt road. "Ms. Collins?" The driver was professionally courteous as he opened the door. "Mr. Reeves is waiting at Riverstone Inn." Sarah hesitated, suddenly feeling out of her depth. Emma sensed her tension and began to fuss in her arms. "Perhaps this was a mistake," she murmured. "If I may," the driver said gently. "Mr. Reeves specifically mentioned your daughter would be welcome. He's arranged for a high chair and everything necessary." This unexpected thoughtfulness tipped the scales. Sarah secured Emma in the car seat that had mysteriously appeared in the vehicle and settled in for the 20-minute drive to Riverstone, the only upscale establishment within 50 miles of Oak Ridge. Alexander was waiting in the restaurant's private dining room, rising immediately when she entered. His smile faltered briefly when he noticed her discomfort. "Is something wrong?" he asked. Sarah shifted Emma to her other hip. "I'm just wondering why the CEO of a major development company wants to have dinner with someone who carries water buckets for a living." Alexander's expression softened. "Direct and honest, I appreciate that." He gestured toward the table. "I promised an explanation, and you deserve one." Once they were seated, with Emma contentedly exploring a soft toy Alexander had provided, he continued, "Yesterday at the diner, I saw something rare, genuine determination. You moved through that room with a quiet dignity that commanded respect, despite circumstances that would break most people." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "My company transforms struggling communities, but I've been losing touch with what that actually means for individuals. Seeing you carrying those water buckets while caring for your daughter and working, it was a powerful reminder of what resilience truly looks like." Sarah studied him, searching for signs of condescension or pity, but finding none. "So I'm what? Your reality check?" "More like my wake-up call," he admitted. "But that's only part of it." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "There was something else I felt when I saw you. Something I can't quite explain." Their conversation was interrupted as servers brought out the first course. Sarah was surprised to discover Alexander was surprisingly easy to talk to. He listened intently as she described the challenges facing Oak Ridge residents, not just the water issues, but the lack of childcare options, healthcare access, and living wage jobs. "The mill employed 3 generations of families here," she explained. "When it closed, it took more than jobs. It took the town's identity." "What about you?" Alexander asked. "Were you always in Oak Ridge?" Sarah hesitated, then shared her story. Her scholarship to nursing school, her relationship with Emma's father, and how his abandonment had sent her life spiraling. She'd come to Oak Ridge because it was the only place she could afford housing on her savings. "I had plans to restart nursing school once Emma was a bit older," she admitted. "But reality set in pretty quickly." "You'd still make an excellent nurse," Alexander observed. Sarah smiled sadly. "Dreams have to wait when survival is the priority." As their meal progressed, Alexander shared parts of his own story. Growing up with a single mother who had worked multiple jobs to support him, his determination to create a company that revitalized communities rather than simply profiting from them, and his recent realization that he'd become disconnected from his company's original mission. "My mother would be disappointed in what I've become," he confessed, starting to see communities as numbers on spreadsheets rather than people with lives and dreams. By the time dessert arrived, Emma had fallen asleep in the portable bassinet Alexander had somehow arranged. The conversation had shifted to his plans for Oak Ridge. "The mill can be retrofitted for sustainable furniture manufacturing," he explained, showing her preliminary sketches on his tablet. "Using local timber processed responsibly, we can employ at least 60 people initially." "And the water system?" Sarah asked, the question that mattered most to her. "Engineering team arrives tomorrow," he replied. "Temporary measures in place within a week, permanent solution within 3 months." Sarah's skepticism must have shown on her face. "You don't believe me?" Alexander asked, seeming genuinely concerned. "It's just, people make promises to this town all the time. The last developer disappeared with the town's infrastructure fund." Alexander's expression darkened. "I'm not that developer, Sarah. I give you my word. In 1 week you won't need to carry water anymore." The intensity of his gaze made her heart flutter unexpectedly. "Why does it matter so much to you?" Before he could answer, his phone rang. He checked it, frowning. "I need to take this. Corporate emergency." Sarah nodded, using the moment to collect herself. What was happening here? Was she actually developing feelings for a man who lived in a completely different world? Alexander's conversation seemed tense, with him repeatedly saying, "That's not acceptable," and "find another way." When he returned, his expression was troubled. "Problems?" Sarah asked. "My board questioning the Oak Ridge approach," he said, then surprised her with an unexpected question. "Would you show me where you get your water tomorrow? I want to understand exactly what you go through every day." Sarah blinked in surprise. "You want to walk the water route with me? If you'll allow it." The sincerity in his voice made her nod despite her reservations. The next morning, Sarah was startled to find Alexander waiting outside her cottage at dawn, dressed in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, a stark contrast to his business attire. "You actually came," she said. unable to hide her surprise. "I keep my promises," he replied simply. With Mrs. Rodriguez watching Emma, Sarah led Alexander down the steep path to the community water point. He insisted on carrying the empty buckets, observing everything with keen attention. "The town council installed this pump after the well dried up," Sarah explained, "but they couldn't afford to extend pipes to the outlying homes." As they filled the buckets, Sarah noticed Alexander taking photos and making notes in his ever-present notebook. The return journey uphill was where the true challenge began. "May I?" Alexander asked, gesturing to the yoke. Sarah hesitated, then helped position it across his shoulders. "Careful, it's heavier than it looks." Alexander's confident expression quickly transformed as he felt the full weight. By halfway up the hill, he was breathing heavily, his designer shoes slipping on the dusty path. "You do this 10 times daily?" he asked incredulously. "Sometimes more in summer," Sarah replied, fighting a smile at his struggle with what was her routine burden. When they reached her cottage, Alexander set down the buckets with obvious relief. "That was humbling," he admitted, wiping sweat from his brow. "Welcome to my world," Sarah said lightly. Instead of responding immediately, Alexander stared at her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You're extraordinary, Sarah Collins." Before she could formulate a response, his phone rang again. This time his expression darkened as he answered. The conversation was brief but clearly tense. "I need to go," he said, his voice tight. "Board emergency meeting. They're voting to pull the Oak Ridge project entirely." "What? Why?" Sarah asked, alarm rising in her chest. "Financial concerns. Competing projects." He hesitated. "The truth is, some board members think Oak Ridge isn't worth saving." The familiar sting of abandonment pierced Sarah. "So that's it? One dinner, one water walk, and you disappear like everyone else?" Alexander's expression hardened with determination. "No, that's not who I am." He reached for her hand impulsively. "Trust me, Sarah. I'm coming back." As his car pulled away, Sarah couldn't help the wave of doubt washing over her. Experience had taught her that men like Alexander Reeves didn't fight for people like her, yet something in his eyes made her want to believe otherwise. The town was abuzz the next day with rumors that Reeves' development was withdrawing. Sarah kept her head down at the diner, ignoring the speculative glances and whispers, focusing instead on the water she would need to carry later. 3 days passed with no word from Alexander, and Sarah began accepting that whatever connection they'd shared had been a momentary aberration in both their lives. On the 4th day, as she trudged up the hill with her morning water load, Sarah spotted a cluster of vehicles at the edge of town, construction trucks, water tankers, and a now familiar black SUV. Her heart leapt traitorously in her chest as she quickened her pace. Sarah stood frozen, water bucket still balanced on her shoulders, as she watched workers in high-visibility vests unloading equipment from the trucks. At the center of the activity stood Alexander, now dressed in jeans and a work shirt, directing operations with the same authority he'd shown in his business suit. When he turned and saw her, his face broke into a smile that reached his eyes. "You came back," Sarah said as he approached, disbelief evident in her voice. "I told you I would." Alexander gestured to the trucks. The board voted against the Oak Ridge project 3-2. Sarah's heart sank. "So all this is Plan B," Alexander replied with a hint of defiance. "I'm funding the water infrastructure personally. The manufacturing project is on hold, but this—" He gestured to the water tankers. "This couldn't wait." He reached for the yoke on her shoulders, gently lifting the heavy burden. "You shouldn't have to carry this anymore." Sarah was speechless as Alexander set the buckets down. "Why would you do this? It must be costing millions." "Some things matter more than money," he said simply. "May I show you the plan?" Still stunned, Sarah followed him to a folding table where blueprints were spread out. Construction foreman Mike Delgado, a longtime Oak Ridge resident, was explaining the project to a group of curious locals. "We're installing a new pumping system and running pipes to all 37 homes currently without water access," Mike explained excitedly. "Mr. Reeves hired our local crew first, bringing in specialists only where needed. Temporary water tanks will be in place by nightfall," Alexander added, pointing to the tankers. "Every home will have running water within 10 days while we complete the permanent system." Sarah's mind reeled. 10 days? "I would have preferred 7, but the engineering team insisted on being realistic," Alexander said with a slight smile. Mrs. Rodriguez appeared in the crowd, holding Emma. "Is it true?" she asked Sarah. "We're getting water pipes?" Before Sarah could answer, Town Mayor Bill Harmon pushed through the gathering. His pinched expression contrasted sharply with the hopeful faces around him. "This is all very impressive, Mr. Reeves," Harmon said loudly. "But you can't just start digging up our town without proper permits and council approval." Alexander's expression remained calm. "All permits were filed electronically last night, Mayor Harmon. Emergency provisions in the county code allow for expedited approval in cases of public health necessity." He handed Harmon a folder. "You'll find everything in order." The mayor's face reddened as he flipped through the documents. "This is highly irregular. The council should have been consulted." "The council has been consulting about this water crisis for 3 months," Sarah found herself saying, surprising everyone, including herself. "While some of us carry hundreds of pounds of water uphill every day." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Mayor Harmon glared at Sarah before turning back to Alexander. "There's still the matter of the mill property. Your company hasn't finalized that purchase." "This water project isn't contingent on the mill purchase," Alexander replied evenly. "It's a separate humanitarian initiative." As the mayor sputtered further objections, Sarah noticed a sleek town car pulling up. A tall, elegant woman in an impeccable suit emerged, her calculating gaze sweeping over the scene before fixing on Alexander. "Alex, a word," the woman called sharply. Alexander's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Excuse me," he said to Sarah before walking over to the newcomer. "Who's that?" Sarah asked Mike. "Victoria Hayes, Reeves Development's CFO," Mike replied. "Been calling the site all morning. Doesn't sound happy about any of this." From a distance, Sarah watched Alexander engaged in what appeared to be a tense conversation with Victoria. The woman's perfectly manicured finger jabbed repeatedly at a tablet she held, while Alexander stood with arms crossed, shaking his head. "You can't just divert company resources for a personal project." Victoria's voice carried across the site. "The board will have a field day with this." "They're my personal resources, Victoria, not the company's," Alexander replied, his voice controlled but firm. "And I've made my decision. This is about her, isn't it?" Victoria lowered her voice, but Sarah could still hear as she cast a dismissive glance in her direction. "The waitress with the water buckets? Really, Alex?" "That's enough," Alexander said with an edge that made even Victoria step back. "This is about doing what's right, something the company seems to have forgotten." Victoria's expression hardened. "Your father built this company with ruthless efficiency, not misplaced charity. Don't throw away everything he created because you've developed a conscience, or worse, a crush." "My father isn't running the company anymore. I am." Alexander's tone left no room for argument. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a water system to build." As Victoria stormed back to her car, Alexander returned to Sarah, visibly tense but composed. "Sorry about that. Where were we?" "You were explaining how you're risking your position as CEO for a town you barely know," Sarah said quietly. Alexander's expression softened. "I'm not risking anything that matters." He hesitated. "Would you have dinner with me again tonight? There's something important I need to discuss." Before Sarah could respond, a commotion erupted near the construction equipment. Mayor Harmon was arguing with several workers, waving a cell phone. "Stop all work immediately. I've just spoken with Commissioner Dawson. He's issued a cease and desist until the county board reviews these permits." Alexander quickly moved to intervene, but Sarah was faster. She stepped directly in front of Harmon, Emma now in her arms. "Are you seriously halting clean water for our community?" she demanded. "Why?" Harmon's eyes narrowed. "This isn't about water, Sarah. This is about proper procedures, and this is about the deal you made with Mountain Vista Developments last year," Sarah interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. "The one where they promised infrastructure upgrades but disappeared with the funds." A hush fell over the gathering. Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. "They were your college roommates' company, weren't they, Mayor? The same company that donated generously to your campaign." Harmon's face drained of color. "That's preposterous. You're a waitress. What would you know about municipal contracts?" "I may carry water for a living now, but I was studying public health policy before life took a turn," Sarah replied steadily. "And Mrs. Rodriguez's grandson works for the county records office." "People talk in small towns, Mayor." Alexander stepped forward. "Is this true, Mayor Harmon?" Before Harmon could respond, an elderly man pushed through the crowd, George Winters, the town's most respected elder and former mill foreman. Every word, George confirmed. Mountain Vista was supposed to fix our water system last year. Sarah's not the only one who's been connecting those dots. The mayor backed away, face flushed. This is slander. I'll sue for defamation. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation, Mayor, Alexander said coolly, and I have excellent lawyers. As Harmon retreated to his car amid angry murmurs from the townspeople, Alexander turned to Sarah with undisguised admiration. That was impressive, he said softly. You've been investigating the mayor. Sarah shifted Emma to her other hip. Not actively, but when you carry water past the mayor's house with its new swimming pool every day, you start asking questions. Alexander's expression grew serious. Sarah, there's something you should know. When I looked into expediting the permits, I discovered irregularities in the town's water management contracts. I've reported them to the county commissioner. That explains Harmon's reaction, Sarah mused. He knew he was already in trouble. As the day progressed, Sarah watched in amazement as temporary water tanks were positioned throughout the community and pipes were laid with remarkable efficiency. By sunset, Alexander's team had installed a faucet outside her cottage, the first running water she'd had in 3 months. When she turned the handle and water flowed freely, Sarah couldn't hold back her tears. It's just the temporary system, Alexander said, standing beside her. The permanent solution will be better. It's not about the water, Sarah admitted, wiping her eyes. It's that you kept your promise. No one does that anymore. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something powerful and unspoken passed between them. Alexander reached out, gently brushing a tear from her cheek. About that dinner tonight, he said softly. Sarah nodded, suddenly unable to find her voice. That evening, Alexander surprised her by arranging dinner on her own porch rather than at a restaurant. Emma slept peacefully inside while Mrs. Rodriguez kept watch, allowing Sarah and Alexander to talk privately as the sun set over Oak Ridge. This is better than Riverstone, Sarah said, genuinely touched by his consideration. I thought you might be more comfortable here, Alexander replied, and I wanted to talk without interruptions. His serious tone made Sarah nervous. Is something wrong? Alexander set down his fork. Victoria was partly right today. The board isn't happy with my focus on Oak Ridge. They've called for an emergency meeting tomorrow to discuss my leadership. Because you're helping us? Because I've prioritized people over profits. My father built Reeves Development on ruthless efficiency. I've been trying to balance that with social responsibility, but the board sees it as weakness. What will you do? Sarah asked quietly. Alexander met her gaze directly. I'm prepared to step down if necessary. What? Sarah was stunned. So you'd give up your company, your legacy. What good is a legacy if it comes at the expense of my principles? Alexander reached across the table, taking her hand. Meeting you changed something fundamental for me, Sarah. You reminded me why I wanted to lead Reeves Development in the first place, to make a real difference in forgotten communities. The intensity in his eyes made Sarah's heart race. She pulled her hand away gently. Alexander, I'm just a single mom who carries water buckets. I'm not worth throwing away your career for. That's exactly my point, he said earnestly. You don't see your own worth. Every day you face impossible challenges with grace and dignity. You've created a life for Emma against all odds. He paused. And I think I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the evening air between them as Sarah stared at him in shock, unsure how to respond to a declaration she had never expected to hear. Sarah's world seemed to stop. Alexander's words echoed in her mind as she struggled to comprehend their meaning. You think you're falling in love with me? She finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I know it sounds sudden, Alexander admitted, his expression vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. But something happened the moment I saw you carrying those water buckets. It wasn't pity, Sarah. It was recognition. Recognition of what? She asked, fighting the urge to dismiss his words as temporary infatuation. Of someone who refuses to be defined by circumstances. Of someone who carries literal and figurative weight without complaint. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. Do you know how rare that is in my world of corporate facades and strategic relationships? Sarah stood up, needing distance to think clearly. Alexander, you've known me for less than a week. This isn't love. It's some kind of savior complex or rebellion against your board. Is that what you truly believe? He remained seated, giving her the space she needed. "I don't know what to believe," she confessed. "Men like you don't fall for women like me. That's not how the real world works. Perhaps it's time to reconsider what's possible in this real world of yours," Alexander replied softly. Their conversation was interrupted by Sarah's phone ringing. It was Mrs. Rodriguez, her voice urgent. "Sarah, turn on your TV, Channel 7 News, now." Inside, Sarah switched on her small television to find Mayor Harmon's face filling the screen. The ticker beneath him read, "Oak Ridge Mayor arrested on corruption charges." County officials arrested Mayor William Harmon this evening following allegations of embezzlement and fraud related to infrastructure funds, the news anchor announced. According to sources, evidence was provided by Reeves Development CEO Alexander Reeves, who uncovered financial irregularities while working on a water project in the area. Sarah turned to Alexander, who looked genuinely surprised. "I filed the report, but I had no idea they would move this quickly." The news continued. Documents reveal Harmon diverted over $2 million from the town's water infrastructure fund to a shell company linked to Mountain Vista Developments, owned by his former college roommate. As the implications sank in, Sarah's phone began ringing constantly with calls from townspeople. By morning, Oak Ridge was in turmoil. The town council called an emergency meeting, and to Sarah's shock, several council members suggested she attend as a community representative. "People trust you, Sarah," George Winters told her when he came to personally request her presence. "You stood up when no one else would." The meeting was held in the crowded town hall. Alexander sat quietly in the back, despite being offered a place at the main table. His quiet support gave Sarah courage as she addressed the interim leadership. "For months, many of us have carried water uphill while watching our town deteriorate," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "We didn't just lose water, we lost trust. Any solution must restore both." As she outlined practical steps for moving forward, Sarah noticed Alexander watching her with undisguised admiration. She realized she was drawing on knowledge from her abandoned nursing studies, speaking about public health impacts and community resilience. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Council member Eleanor Jenkins approached her immediately. "We need someone to serve as community liaison for the water project and reconstruction efforts. Would you consider taking the position?" Sarah was momentarily speechless. "I'm not qualified." "You just proved otherwise," Eleanor interrupted. "It's a paid position, Sarah, with flexible hours and childcare allowance." As the meeting dispersed, Alexander approached. "You were incredible. Did you have something to do with this job offer?" Sarah asked suspiciously. "Absolutely not," he replied. "Though I would have hired you myself if I'd thought of it." He hesitated. "I've postponed my board meeting. I'm staying in Oak Ridge until the water system is complete." "What about your company?" "It will survive without me for a few weeks." His expression grew serious. "About last night, I need time, Alexander," Sarah interrupted gently. "This is all happening so fast." He nodded, respecting her boundaries. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." Over the next 3 weeks, Oak Ridge transformed. The water project progressed rapidly with pipes reaching every home. Sarah threw herself into her new role, coordinating between construction crews and residents, identifying overlooked needs, and ensuring even the most vulnerable community members were served. She and Alexander developed a working relationship built on mutual respect. He never pressed her about his declaration, instead showing his feelings through consistent actions, being present, listening to her ideas, valuing her expertise about the community, and always finding small ways to make Emma smile. As the permanent water system neared completion, Sarah found herself dwelling less on Alexander's wealth and position, and more on the man himself, his integrity when facing the board's opposition, his genuine interest in Oak Ridge's residents, his willingness to get his hands dirty alongside the construction crews, and the gentle way he read stories to Emma while Sarah attended community meetings. Then came the day when Victoria Hayes returned to Oak Ridge, this time with 2 other board members in tow. "The board meeting can't be postponed any longer, Alex," Victoria informed him on the main street, not bothering to lower her voice. "Your little humanitarian project has cost shareholders millions. They're calling for a vote of no confidence." Sarah, who was reviewing plans with Mike nearby, felt her heart sink. She'd known this confrontation was inevitable, but seeing Alexander's corporate world collide so starkly with Oak Ridge's reality made the impossibility of their situation painfully clear. Alexander remained calm. Then we'll have the meeting here. Tomorrow. Victoria looked horrified. In this backwater town, absolutely not. The board members are already here, Alexander pointed out reasonably, and I won't leave until the water system is operational. That evening, Alexander came to Sarah's cottage. Emma immediately reached for him, now comfortable in his presence. As Sarah watched him gently bounce her daughter on his knee, she felt the walls around her heart crumbling. The final water connections happen tomorrow, he said, his expression conflicted. The board meeting is scheduled for noon. Will you lose your company? Sarah asked directly. Possibly. Alexander's candor was one of the things she'd come to value most. The vote could go either way. And if you do, he met her gaze steadily, then I start something new, something better aligned with my values. Sarah took a deep breath. And where do I fit into those plans? Alexander set Emma down carefully before taking Sarah's hands. Wherever you want to. I meant what I said 3 weeks ago, Sarah. My feelings have only grown stronger. Even if you lose everything tomorrow, I won't lose what matters most. His gaze was unwavering. But I need to know, do I have any chance with you? Or have I misread everything between us? Sarah looked into his eyes, finally allowing herself to acknowledge the feelings she'd been fighting. You haven't misread anything. I'm falling in love with you too, Alexander. But I'm terrified. Of what? That you'll wake up one day and realize I'm not enough, that Emma and I don't belong in your world. Sarah, he said softly, you've never been more wrong about anything. It's my world that needs to change, not you. The next morning brought the moment Oakridge had been waiting for. As engineers prepared to activate the new water system, residents gathered at the town square where a ceremonial fountain had been installed, a symbol of their revitalization. The Reeves Development Board members stood awkwardly to one side, looking out of place in their formal attire. Sarah noticed Alexander speaking intensely with Victoria, who for once seemed to be listening rather than arguing. At precisely 11 o'clock, 10-year-old Lily Martinez, whose asthma had worsened from the dust of the dry season, was given the honor of turning on the main valve. When crystal-clear water burst from the fountain, cheers erupted across the square. Alexander found Sarah in the crowd, his face alight with genuine joy that matched her own. He made his way to her, taking her hand publicly for the first time. "Do you know what today is?" he asked. Sarah looked puzzled. "The water activation. 1 month ago today, I walked into Maggie's diner and saw a woman carrying the weight of water and the world on her shoulders." He squeezed her hand. "My life hasn't been the same since." Before Sarah could respond, Victoria approached them, her expression unreadable. "It's time, Alex. The board is waiting." Alexander nodded, then surprised everyone by leaning down to kiss Sarah gently. "For luck," he whispered before following Victoria. 3 hours later, as Sarah was helping organize the community celebration, Alexander returned to the square. His expression gave nothing away as he approached. "Well?" she asked, heart-pounding. "The board voted to retain me as CEO," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "With conditions. I'm to establish a new community revitalization division focused on sustainable development in struggling towns like Oakridge." Relief flooded through Sarah. "That's wonderful. There's more," Alexander continued. "The division will be headquartered here in Oakridge in the renovated mill building." He paused. "Which means I'll be living here, if that's all right with you." Sarah couldn't contain her smile. "I think that can be arranged. One more thing," Alexander added, suddenly serious. "The division needs a director of community relations, someone who understands both the challenges and the potential of towns like this." He took her hand. "Someone exactly like you, Sarah Collins." "Are you offering me a job?" she asked incredulously. "I'm offering you a partnership." His eyes held hers. "In every sense of the word." As the fountain sparkled in the afternoon sun behind them, Sarah realized that the weight she had carried for so long, the water buckets, the financial struggles, the crushing responsibility of raising Emma alone, had transformed into something else entirely, not disappeared but shared, lightened by love she never expected to find. "Partners," she agreed, rising on tiptoes to kiss him as the townspeople of Oakridge cheered, not for the water but for the promise of what their community could become when burdens were carried together. Emma, secure in Mrs. Rodriguez's arms nearby, reached toward them both as if already understanding that her world had fundamentally changed, that her mother would still carry water when necessary, but never again alone.